Bonjour à tous les présents, où vous soyez.
Good afternoon, wherever you may be. Welcome to all the present. My name is Danielle Costa. I'm the Press and Communication Officer of the International Wine and Vine Organization. It's with great pleasure that with the OIV team and the Director General of OIV, Mr. Pau Roca, we welcome the 700 participants registered for our press conference, coming from more than 50 countries. Before we begin the conference, I would like to give you some technical information. This conference will be translated simultaneously in French, English, and Spanish. This clearly shows the universality of our organization. You can choose the language of your choice at the bottom of the screen by clicking on the little globe icon. For the moment, the press dossier is available in English. You can find it on the shared link in the Zoom chat. After Mr. Roca's presentation, there will be a question and answer period. At this moment, you will be able to ask for the floor. We would like to invite you to ask your questions in the Zoom Q&A portion as well. Now, without waiting further, I'd like to give the floor to the Director General of the OIV, Mr. Pau Roca. Good morning. I'm speaking from the OIV headquarters here in Paris, where it is presently 3 p.m. Before we start, I would especially like to express my solidarity with the French wine growers, but also with the Italian and German wine growers who have suffered the consequences of recent frost in their vineyards. A year ago, I addressed you. It was just a month after the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And at the time, we had technically difficult connections. However, I anticipated at the time a catastrophic situation. You'll be able to see how the first impact was truly a disaster. However, we also observed changes and transfers that took place, some improvements that took place throughout the year. The figures are not very amusing, and they're even more tedious if we see that they represent a crisis. However, figures are an inevitable part of reality. I will continue my presentation in English at this point, and then I will present the conclusions in Spanish.
Shows a stable situation in the last 3 years. Today we have 7.3 million hectares planted of all kinds of vines, including fresh table grapes, grapevines of different varieties, and vineyard that produces also dried raisins. Stability is explained, as you will see in this graph, because 45%, that is 3.2 million hectares, are in the European Union, which are under the cap of an authorization system of new plantings. But for the rest of countries, there is an heterogeneous tendency that balances amongst the different countries, leading to this stability. Now, 6 countries account for almost 60% of the surface. 3 are in Europe: Spain, France, and Italy. And the other 3 are China, Turkey, and the USA. Spain continues to be in the first place in vineyard area. China, that was second in the last year in this ranking, has reduced its data in surface due to a revision in the series by the Chinese National Bureau of Statistics, and consequently, it's moving to the 3rd place. This revision, as we will see, has a big impact on other figures that we will present. France, Italy, and China are the only large vineyards that have increased in size in 2020. 260 million hectares in this figure is the production of this year. Only 1% more than in 2019. So this figure for 2 consecutive years, this is under the average level, but this is good news in light of the low consumption of this year. In October of 2020, we gave you an estimate of 258 million hectoliters, and we were very close. The 2 million of difference is because Italy, France, and Spain revised their initial data as they had an extremely good weather and they produced better. So now these 3 countries, you will see the 3 countries, Italy, France, and Spain, that account for more than half of the wine produced. And 8 countries benefited 77% of the total wine produced. The EU accounts for 63%, with an 8% more than in 2019. Country by country, you will see the totals in red and percentage changes in the lower blue histogram for the main wine producing countries. Italy, France, and Spain saw an increase relative to 2019, as I said, due to good weather conditions. USA decreased because of the fires, and also because they took containment measures to prevent oversupply. The weather had a negative effect in Argentina, Chile, and Brazil because of El Niño phenomenon. And Australia also experienced, as you remember, terrible fires. South Africa is still recovering from recurrent drought that started in 2016. And finally, I would say that China is reducing for 4 years in a row because of structural problems, increased competition from imported wine, and reducing internal demand. So we will see now consumption that has gone down by 3% in volume. In value, we can make estimations of 10% reduction by replicating the behavior of exports to the internal market. This fall is due to 2 factors: COVID-19 and accumulated decrease in the last few years in China. This fall is similar. We'll see this behavior in other graphs. It's similar of the one in 2008 and 2009 financial crisis. Although we know that there is wine consumption in 200 countries, only a few players, that is 10 countries, represent 70% of the wine consumption. Now we'll see a very interesting slide that reflects a little bit what happened this year. The difference in consumer behavior across the countries, they behave differently. They are due to different intensity of lockdown measures, and you see this in South Africa with a minus 19%. The weightage of different distribution channels on trade versus on off trade. And this is the case, the impact is the case, for example, in Spain. The dependence on tourism, that's also the case for Spain, for example. Potential increase of, or in fact, increase of online sales, which are very much, which have a big potential. And this is USA and Brazil. So you see here, USA and France, very resilient. USA with light lockdown restrictions, and an e-commerce boom. But in both cases, France and USA decline in value. Italy, that shows an 8% increase in consumption. This is important. This is because of the importance of wine in the consumption, in daily consumption. For China, again, this is a preliminary estimate of apparent consumption. So after the fall of the other data, fall in production and imports, we estimate a fall of minus 17%. South Africa, as you have seen, reflects the sales ban and the possible effect also of substitution to spirits. And the 18% increase of Brazil may be explained by the e-commerce sales. Total consumption of the different countries above 2 million hectoliters, reflected in the right side of the slide. On the left side and on the right side, you see expressed in terms of per capita consumption. So divided by the population of more than 15 years old. It is interesting to compare each country's position in these two rankings, and you could induce an estimate of potential increase in that market. Portugal, being the first, has reduced the per capita consumption due to loss of tourism. Australia occupies an interesting 6th position, and Argentina 7th position, amongst other that are mainly European countries. Wine international trade has been reduced by almost 2% in volume, not that much, but importantly, 7% in value reduction. We have seen that the COVID-19 effect was dramatic in the first semester of the year, because if we look at the data of the first semester, we see a minus 6.7% in volume and minus 12.4% in value. So that indicates that there is a recovery in the second semester. Not bad news. By different categories, sparkling wine is the most affected, definitely. 5% decrease in volume and 15% decrease in value. Still wine, minus 2% in volume, but 6% in value, so prices go down. Back in the box, a new presentation that we can record after a change in the combined nomenclature, we see that there is an increase of 12% in volume, but the increase in value, an 8%, doesn't encompass the increase in volume. So it means that there also we have a price reduction. Only bulk shows an average price increase due to crop shrinkage. So now again, here we see that Italy, France, and Spain exported almost 55 million hectoliters. This is more than half of the world market, 52% in volume and 60% in value. Argentina and Portugal significantly raised their exports. And country by country, you can analyze here the different composition of their exports. Just take note that France, with its large proportion in the sparkling wine exports, has lost more than 1 billion euros. The mirror effect is looking at the imports. UK, Germany, and USA account for almost 40% in volume, and in value, more or less the same, but in a different order. China shows a loss of, take note, 30%, and Russia of minus 21%. Here you can see the different composition of products in each importing country. Volume figures are again in the top, and value figures are in the lower side of the slide. Germany, being the first in volume, is not surprisingly relegated in the third position in value because of the large fraction of bulk wine. This is in violet, you see. The same happens for France. On the other hand, USA imports are the first in value for the high average price of wines imported in this market. The market internationalization index, you'll see it in this graph, is the ratio between world wine exports and world wine consumption. And this is good news, since COVID-19 has not changed this tendency. In 2020, this means that almost half of the wine consumed in the world has crossed at least one border. We ask you now to take this data that we are going to present on the Southern Hemisphere wine production in 2021, so this is the present year, as a very preliminary estimate. Argentina has a 6.4% drop. And this is attributed to the important frost in spring, in October of 2020, and 28 subsequent hailstorms damaging the crop. Chile and Brazil are back to normal crops. Australia is back also to normal levels. Beyond the punctual data of this crop, it is very interesting to see on the right, the small graphs that reflect the tendency of some of these countries, especially South Africa, Chile, and New Zealand. Finalmente voy a presentarles.
I'm now going to present my conclusions in Spanish. A year ago, in fact, on the occasion of this press conference, I presented some estimates, in fact, estimates of a drop of 35%. The figures at the time were correct. In addition to that, there was a lot of pessimism, and in fact, all estimates talked about drop in the economies of 90%. Some star products like champagne, in fact, have seen dramatic drops in sales. In fact, 18% in volume and 1 billion in terms of euros. In fact, the volume dropped little for all the products, but the value of the products has greatly dropped. There was, in fact, a different behavior in the different countries, as we saw. There were the different levels of lockdown. There were the different weight of tourism in the different countries. There was the different weight of wine in the daily consumption habits. As we have seen, there was an increase in Italy of 8%. This happened in that country. We saw also a transfer between the different distribution channels. And we also saw the emergence of e-commerce. Now, in the different markets, the relative weight of one of these varieties has been different, but we have seen everywhere a drop in price. Now, we have seen how the pandemic has impacted at the beginning like an earthquake. And then after that, there was a sort of rebound in the second semester. We will see what happens in 2021. During that year, we might see some replicas of this initial earthquake. Now, in front of this crisis, we have seen that even if wine is consumed in 200 countries, 70% of that wine is only consumed in 10 countries. And 6 countries only represent 60% of the vineyard surface area. Now, 8 countries, in fact, represent 75% of the wine produced around the world. And we can see also that 3 of those countries represent half the world production. Now, in fact,
we can see that the imports and exports take place between a limited number of players. So there's a big concentration, and this means a lot of risk also. This means that it is important to diversify. Let's start with consumption. In Asia, in general, the presence of wine is symbolic. And unfortunately, we see a drop in China, a country where we started seeing an increase. So at OIV, we have to work so that wine becomes a product consumed on a broader scale around the world. This is a big challenge. Asia, in fact, is clearly the big objective for the vitivinicultural world. For the wine producers, in fact, they will need to go on adapting to diversification of the market and distribution channels. We have seen the success of those who have integrated online and offline services. And in this environment, in fact, recourse to data that is generated and to information through new technologies is essential. We know that there has been a crisis, but it's not an isolated crisis. No, it's a change in system that we are going to see. And in fact, those who are able to incorporate, in fact, an behavior of adaptation are those who will survive. The return to normal will be different. And in fact, we see that society values health as an absolute good and that the political sphere is responsible for that. We think, in fact, that there will be global, in fact, policies in the area of public health, in the area of alcohol consumption and restrictive measures. Before this situation, we can say that wine can claim and must maintain its links with a local economy that can warrant sustainability in all areas. And in this crisis, most of the governments in the producing countries have understood that wine, in fact, is rooted in the culture and have considered it as an essential economic activity. Different issues have unfairly shaken the natural trading of wine. We have seen the dispute Airbus-Boeing in the United States and in some European countries. Another issue, for example, was China accusing Australia of dumping, and in a more limited level, the Brexit. We have also to note the change in the White House, which gives us some hope. The biggest signal of the Biden administration was, in fact, realigning along the environmental objectives, the return to the climate change agreement, also some obstacles or blockages at WTO that have been raised. So we can hope that the USA will come back as a loyal partner, and OIV, in fact, hopes to retrieve this important partner. As we see in the world of wine, governments play an important role that, in fact, can help the development of the sector. Now, the framework, in fact, for the progress is sustainability and innovation. And now is the time to believe that OIV also plays an important role in the international cooperation between states to speed up the inclusion of sustainability criteria in all areas, as well as digital innovation. And at this stage, I'm ready to answer your questions, in fact. So I'm available for questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Sí, perfectamente, Vicente.
Yes, we can hear you. So good afternoon for this detailed presentation. Now we see that the situation is an interesting one and a big challenge. And I would like to know what is the position of the OIV concerning support at the European level concerning wine. Are you going to make any recommendations for the support of the sector at the level of the European Union and the member states? Now, you know that at OIV, we have 48 members. 20 are in Europe and 28 are not in the European Union. So a majority are outside. And in fact, we can say that there are mechanisms, there are a certain number of countries that in fact offer economic support or legislative measures, most of them. And in fact, these direct or orientate the market. In general, these economic measures, in fact, are okay on a temporary basis, but we have to be careful not to go too much in that direction because it can destabilize the market. So be careful with the aids and support. They, shouldn't go too far, otherwise the situation will then be corrected in the other direction, and this can hurt. Thank you.
The next question.
I believe that the journalist Agnieszka Kumar has questions for you.
Agnieszka Kumar from RFI has a question to you.
Agnieszka,
Well,
we don't hear you. Maybe you can read them.
Agnieszka, it's not reaching us. I will give the floor to Ana Romão, who asked for the floor. Well, meanwhile, apparently people are a little bit shy to speak. I received a few questions, and let's start with this one that I received by written from Agnieszka Kumar, precisely. And I'm going to speak now in French. Malgré le Brexit,
despite the Brexit and the health restrictions, the UK in 2020 is the number wine market in terms of volume and second in value. Do you think that this can go on in 2021? And what is the weight or the strength of that market? Thank you for that question. Now, the trend for the UK, we have seen this even before the Brexit, is a drop in exports from Italy and France. So trade in that area has dropped, but we see an increase for New Zealand, Australia, the US, Chile, Argentina. And it is clear that we see a diversification of their import origin or sources. We have to say also that the UK has in fact, imported something like 30% of its imports are for re-export. So this is quite a high figure, 30% for re-export, repackaging.
To speak from Federico Pittinelli from Italy, from Wine News. I will give him the floor.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Hello. Just a question. I would like to ask the position of Oive about the alcohol question in the Europe Beating Cancer Plan. And then if there is an alarm about the maintenance of wine prices given the continuing pandemic crisis, especially in Europe. Thank you.
Well, the European Union is not a member of the OIV. That's to clarify this. But it's, as I said, 20 members of the European Union are members of the OIV. An alarm? Not an alarm. The prices have gone down, but we have probably a shrinkage in the next crop. So there cannot go further below, I think. So this is the situation. And probably the demand will keep more or less the model as we anticipate a little bit, as in the crisis of 2008, 2009. We have seen the first movement down, and we can see some type of recovery, probably. So concerning the demand, we have to be conservative, but prices have gone down, but I don't think they will go below. Thank you.
Okay, now time to have a look on our chat. We have a question from Carla Urunaga in Spanish. ¿A qué se debe la disminución del consumo en China?
Why do we see a drop in consumption in China? Well, in China, there are different points that are important to mention. We have the structural problems, the weather conditions that are not very good, technical limitations, low productivity. And here we're talking about production. There's a competition from imports. The imported wines play an important role and compete with the local production. And the domestic demand is dropping. The consumption has dropped over the 4 past years. So different elements, and it's apparent consumption. That is to say, you take imports, production, and on that basis, you calculate consumption. So production has dropped over the 4 years, and over 3 years, the imports have dropped. And the result, which is apparent consumption, has also dropped. And for the economic growth in China, yes, it goes on growing, but at a slower rate. And in fact, wine only represents 3% of alcohol beverages. And it's more, they drink wine in festive events. So the situation, the consumption situation is very volatile. So the outlook, I think that the forecasts have been a bit exaggerated. So the reality is what we see today. So there was also a correction in the figures. This is an additional element in the area of statistics. They changed their statistics also, as we have mentioned. Thank you. Now, Angel Calvo from the Jefe agency. Angel, you have the floor. I would be very happy to answer your questions. Can you hear me now? Yes, perfectly. A question concerning the measures taken by the US against 3 European countries with the Boeing and Airbus dispute. You talked about other countries also? Well, yes, we looked at this. And in fact, we have not seen an increase in the other countries to offset the ban on some of the European countries. Now, on top of that, there were inventories in the US. Maybe, but what we can say that those who suffered really are the American consumers. This is the conclusion we can draw from that event. We could have thought that some countries would increase their exports to the US on that occasion, but no, we have not seen that in the facts. No one really benefited from that. And this is what happens when you take measures against one product, which is at the end of the chain, and then the one who suffers in the end, in fact, is more the consumer. And even when the measures are lifted, you're not sure to recover the former situation. So it's not something that you can replace with something else. In the end, this does have an impact on the product. And now, another question in Spanish on the chat. That is the following question. In what way OIV can support, in fact, to make sure that there is a responsible consumption of wine in those countries where there is such a consumption? You know, wine, in fact, is very important from the point of view of the vineyard. OIV has been promoting wine for more than 100 years. So preserving all this is crucial so that the wine culture can be disseminated. Producing countries are familiar with that culture, but it's important to disseminate that culture outside the producing countries. And this is why I call for this diversification. There are many countries who could, in fact, be interested more in wine. Asia represents a major opportunity. Maybe OIV could carry out some symbolic actions there, but then the actual momentum has to develop. And it's important to communicate around wine there. We have received an invitation, for example, from Japan to go to Osaka in 2025. And I think that we have to seize that opportunity. So this is a way to promote our culture. Now, there are also the books that have been awarded. We have the competitions also. And we have to recognize that, in fact, wine and vineyards are rooted in a culture and really bring a lot of added value where the actual production is located. Now, another written question by RFI.
Could you say a few words about South Africa, how the very strict lockdown have an impact on this sector? South Africa has suffered from a new prohibition, a ban, a market ban, which was surprising, but that's the way it is. The sale of all alcoholic beverages was banned, and this led to a very significant reduction internally, but also in terms of the trade with the other Southern African countries, whether we're talking of Lesotho, Swaziland, etc. However, the exports outside of that group of countries have maintained themselves. In other words, the exports from South Africa have not suffered a reduction because of the internal ban that they implemented. Yes? Thank you for your question. We now have questions from the chat again, this time in English.
How will the industry need to continue to adapt to the challenges of a shifting consumer market after the COVID-19 crisis? Do you expect the sparkling wine sector to see a rebound in the recovery?
Okay, to recover the sparkling wine, well, the problem of the sparkling wine is still too much linked to certain festivities. Most of the world, the occasions are limited and they are not constant and permanent during either the season or the different occasions in a daily basis. So that's very volatile in a moment of changes of consumption habits or circumstances that have been the case. No, but of course, I think people will continue to marry. They will continue to have parties, and they will continue to celebrate. So that's something that we will recover. At the same time, I think sparkling wine, it's something to discover under a different circumstance of not so occasional. No, so I think we can incorporate sparkling wine also as an aperitif, or depending on the different countries, it changes, but it's more or less this is what happens. So I think that we will recover sparkling wine. Not probably even we will be celebrating very soon, and maybe will be a peak of consumption. So I am quite optimistic.
Volviendo ahora al chat y a una
Coming back to the chat and a Spanish question. You spoke of the interest, in fact, for wine consumption in Asia. Yes, certainly. But what is happening in Mexico, Colombia, and Peru? Are there projects or intentions to observe this consumption in South America? Well, these are countries, in fact, which is very much linked to economic situations. And This is, in fact, very much linked to the growth in the middle class. We know that the markets where these circumstances will indeed change. In any case, as far as these countries are concerned, we can say that they are suffering much more, unfortunately, today than others. They are suffering more from the consequences of the COVID pandemic. We know very well that Brazil is suffering the consequences of the pandemic very directly, and Colombia as well, where you have countries, in fact, where the pandemic has had significant impact on economic growth. And this, it's the middle class which consumes wine, and this is something which has suffered as well.
Does the OIV see increase in more sustainable vine production?
Does the OIV
See increase in more sustainable vine production?
We are definitely, this is really a driver for the OIV. Sustainability in all aspects of economy, environment, all the aspects, even the cultural sustainability. We think that unless we conserve the planet, we have no justification for growth. That's the idea of sustainability. It's not a type of wine that is sustainable. No. It's the whole system that has to go that way. And this is very important to understand. And I believe strongly that all the vitivinicultural economy can be fully sustainable. This is not that difficult. By the end of our strategic plan in 2024, we are probably going to show that the vitivinicultural system is fully sustainable. It respects the conservation aspects, and that we can grow we are going to be a paradigm for the rest of economies, I'm sure.
Before passing to the next question, I would like to remind the present journalists that we have now 11 minutes left. So if you would like to ask questions, you have to request for the floor. Okay. Now I'm going to proceed with a question sent by Gianluca Zeni from the Settimanale Trevichieri. And the question is the following. Historical OIV data showed that international trade in 2008 and 2009 has fallen and then has rebounded very quickly in following years. Can we expect the same trend in 2022-2023 after the COVID crisis? Or the effects of the crisis on the wine markets will be totally different than the 2008-2009 period?
Thank you for considering me like somebody that can forecast the future. I'm not, I have not this capacity, but it is true that at this moment, we can see that the COVID crisis has more or less the same derivative, the same tendency that that the 2008-2009 financial crisis. And this is something that tells us that probably we are in a similar scheme. And even it even, I mean, there are the things that are happening are, if you look at the second semester of the 2020 year, of the year 2020, was quite, I mean, it was not that bad compared to the enormous impact of the first semester. So there are some elements to think that we are going to recover more or less quite fast. I think that I don't want to be mistaken, but probably the possibilities for recovering are even better than in the 2008, 2009. We still don't know. We still don't know some things, like I was saying, in some markets, the crisis maybe has not even begun. But we'll see. Probably we are in a similar situation. Let's hope.
And now it's time to give the floor to Liz Fetch, Master of Wine.
Yes, thank you for an excellent presentation. Greetings from California. My question has to do with the increase in Brazil and the decrease in China in wine consumption. And could you expand more on the reasons behind this?
We still have not all the elements, but Brazil has increased a lot the e-commerce ways of selling wine. I think it's 400%. I don't know. I'm looking if we have the data, but it's impressive. Brazil has increased a lot, but of course we're starting with very low figures. Okay, it's easy to have big indexes of increase when the baseline is not that big. This is one explanation. The China reduction, as I said, it's more complex because we don't have the figure of a contrasted figure of direct consumption. What we are measuring in all countries, but in some countries we have a system to check, is what we call apparent consumption. That is the result of the arithmetics of imports, exports, production, use of industrial wine, etc., and also stocks. And what comes out of this is like a P&L sheet, a profit and loss sheet. You have consumption. That would be to explain it in an arithmetical way. And the Bureau of Statistics of China has changed the data for the last 3 years. And with this data, we have seen something that we were already anticipating. And it is real. It is real because it shows a problem, as I said, in China, that it has to do with structural problems, competition from imported wines, decrease of internal demand. They are not increasing their economy at the rate they were increasing, and the small weight of wine in their consumption of alcoholic drinks, only a 3%. And I was saying also that it has to do a lot with this volatility that when you drink only wine in very occasional or gifts or occasions. And so we were thinking that China was the driver in consumption. We cannot think this anymore. And that's big change in our perspective. But of course, Asia is not only China. It's also China. But we have many other countries where consumption per capita is so low, and there are no religion bans or cultural bans or barriers. It's just there waiting to know what the culture of wine is. And that happens with many countries where we can increase wine culture, wine knowledge, then probably wine consumption. But what is more important is what you do. Masters of wine are very important because there is an understanding, a way to understand the product that everybody is interested in that type of cultural aspect and knowledge. So this is the comparison of the two markets and the decrease in both of them. They are very different routes.
Thank you. Very excellent answer.
We have here a request from Rocco Perniolla. I'm going to give you the floor.
Rocco, I cannot hear you. No ti sento. Sí.
Well, apparently it is not working.
Hola.
So
Sí, sí, sí.
Okay.
Sí,
Rocco.
no, perdone, es que me estaban dando a mí la palabra. Soy Ángel Calvo de la agencia EFE.
Pues
de
muy
nuevo.
bien.
No
I'm
sé
very
si...
sorry. In fact, I would like to take the floor. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. I had a problem with the connection, okay? You started your press conference by speaking quite precisely of the last climate phenomena which hit the vineyards in France, Italy, and Germany. Do you have any idea of the potential consequences on the market of these frosts? No, not at all. Neither me nor anyone, I don't think. Let me explain what I'm saying here. We find ourselves at a time of the year where the grapevine phenology is fragile, but varies from one region to another. So the impact, we could say it represents maybe 30%, 60%, 80%, certainly. But what we would see would be a surface analysis, if you like, and then to know what the vine behavior is going to be. Will there be new growth? And at what stage is the grapevine? What was the situation last year? Was there a strong production of grapes last year in this vine, which in fact suffered from the frost the year? If so, there will be nothing because it will have used up all it had to give last year. So it will depend on the energy left within the grapevine to react to the frost. Will it be able to resist? Will it be resilient? Or did it suffer too much? You know that the grapevine is a phenological mystery that you need to look at closely and study closely. In addition to that, in a similar zone, you can have areas which are more hilly, which will have suffered more, sunny areas which suffered less. It also depends on the duration of the frost. So the question is not just at the surface level. I mean, the frost might have penetrated the grapevines in depth, and that is irreversible. So we won't know for a certain amount of time. Now, I read that there would be aid granted, and the aid will be adjusted as we discover in detail the consequences of this climate disaster locally. Let me take advantage of this question to come back to an important issue. I really believe that we would have to envisage quite seriously the deployment of systems which already exist in some countries. These are insurance systems regarding climate change. You know that with climate change, we see all kinds of climate and weather disasters. We can refer to droughts, fires, without speaking of the Chilean earthquake. These are all types of natural catastrophes. Maybe we would need to mutualize all of this. It could be possible. We have time for one last question. I would like to remind the journalists that you can contact by email at the address I indicated in the Zoom chat. Let me remind you that the press kit presented today in English will soon be available in the other OIV languages. Now we're going to end with the following question that appeared on the chat. Will OIV plead in favor of the vitivinicultural sector for a return to a normal situation as quickly as possible? Is ecotourism the key to rapid and future growth? Of course, we're going to plead for a return to normalcy. We are already betting on our own activities, our own meetings to come back to a normal situation as of the month of July. We're waiting for everyone to more or less be vaccinated. We are betting on this possibility. As far as tourism and ecotourism more particularly, you know that it has been hit hard. And I think that this too is going to recover, that tourism will recover. And it's a question of time. People are going to travel again. You know, people had become accustomed to a very international circulation of people. And I think that we are going to recover this, this tourism. And maybe we might think that this tourism will be perhaps more of proximity. Maybe it'll be less massive in nature, and maybe it will be more sustainable, if you like. And this perhaps will lead to a reminder for all of us of what this alert has been. Maybe the tourism will in fact develop in a different way. So I'd like to thank all of you. I'd like to thank you for your attention and say goodbye to all.